LeBron James comes out last night. I think it was last night, yesterday sometime, and he says, we have enough to win. I want to state what I feel, and then I want to hear your thoughts. I believe, talent-wise, they do. Although I believe Derrick Rose would be a perfect addition to add to the squad because the Lakers are clearly not the same when LeBron goes off the floor. When they run their pick-and-roll offense when he's on the floor, and it looks fabulous. He gets off the floor. I don't think Rondo warrants the respect that a Derrick Rose has because he's not a scoring point guard, even though he's a great point guard. And as a result, that has to change things up for Coach Vogel, and I think they're compromised to some degree. But my biggest thing about the Lakers is the Clippers. I think the Lakers need a goon. I think they need a rough ride. I think they need a pest. Well, I don't give a damn if this is a Patrick Beverly or a bigger version of him or something. I think that when it comes down to the Lakers and the Clippers, I think it's about that heart. The Clippers tell me they got 5 dogs on their squad. They're wondering whether or not the Lakers have one. I want to know what your thoughts are when you look at those two L.A. teams, and specifically to what LeBron James said about the Lakers having enough to win this year.
Well, LeBron James has been to so many. I mean, you lose count of how many finals he's been to. I think he's one of those
9.
very, very few players who elevates the other 4 guys on his team like no other. Kind of like Magic Johnson. Like, everybody's a threat on the floor. One thing I have seen in the Lakers, and I'll always give a shout-out to my guys and former teammates, but they had a stretch when AD was out. He missed a bunch of games. They still won. Quinn Cook came in and did a hell of a job coming in, putting in some points. He can score the ball. And, you know, so sometimes you have question marks, and you have guys like Quinn Cook, Alex Caruso. I think Rondo's very underrated as well. Sometimes you look at his numbers and they might not tell the whole story. You know, the way he's orchestrating different things like that. And you don't see often too many teams that put 2 big men and rotate them the way they've done with Dwight Howard and the way they've done with JaVale McGee and how they've done. And then you look at the Clippers and a little different because they have a lot of weapons, like you said. Montrezl Harrell's putting up, you know, he gets 30, you know, seems like every other week. And Lou Williams is able to get to the foul line like no other. And he's shown that he can do that in the playoffs as well. Last year's playoff performance, especially against us, was amazing. And coming back from 31 game and taking the game from us in Golden State, you know, they made us up our game a little bit. So, you know, they have a lot of weapons as well. They've been really solid in terms of where they're positioned right now, considering their injuries and considering that Kawhi Leonard and Paul George haven't been on the floor as much. So, you know, you want to see them play a little bit more these last, you know, 30, 40 games and seeing if they can build some chemistry going to the playoffs because they're going to be dangerous as well.
When you say what you can still do, touched on some of the stuff that you can still do. When I look at the Lakers, there's a good reason people talk about Derrick Rose. They could use another ball handler. I disagree with you about Rondo at this point in his career. I don't think it's a great fit with him out there a lot of the times. I think that's why they need another guy. But they need a two-way wing or a guy who can do things on both sides who's a dog on the Lakers. I agree with Stephen A. That sounds like Andre Iguodala to me. On the other hand, I look at the Clippers and I go, Patrick Beverly, Kawhi Leonard, Paul George, I mean, everywhere you look, you got a dude who will play on both sides of the floor. And I think about Andre Iguodala on that team. Boy, that's a nightmare for other teams. Would you rather go to a team that you feel like you fit in with that group better? Or would you rather go to a team where you look and they go, they could really use a guy like me on that team?
Well, I mean, you're picking your poison, you know, in terms of, you know, you having the poison and you being able to shoot that in every way, whichever way you want against your opponent. You know, I go back to that Rondo thing, you know, I think he does enhance their bench and making sure they get the most out of their bench. And I think that does give them a little bit more depth than the Clippers, but the Clippers have a little bit more firepower in terms of, you know, the guys you just named, Paul George all the way down to Patrick Beverly, Lou Williams, Montrezl Harrell. You know, they just got a lot of things going on right there. And, you know, they got Magruder. They still got some other guys who are still coming to form.
You put Iguodala in that starting 5, and Lou Williams really is a 6th man. Ooh,
right, but Max and Stephen A. keep going under this assumption that the Lakers need a dog, and then implying they don't have a dog on that team. You haven't been in the league and played against all these different players. You might know them more intimately, the guys on that roster. I mean, do you feel that the Lakers have somebody with fire? Sometimes being a dog isn't necessarily communicated vocally or in that way. If there is someone, could you point them out?
Well, I think they've maximized their 2 bigs unlike any other team in the league. You know, with the way that they're rotating.
Other than AD, you mean? You mean Dwight and
Dwight and JaVale, who were written off 4 or 5 years ago in the league, and the way they've been able to resurrect their career, I think that shows. You know, you got to give a lot of credit to LeBron, who's co-signed on it, obviously, and said, bring these guys in. They're going to help us protect the paint. We're going to bring some strength around AD, you know, because the perception is AD's a little fragile in the paint with people trying to bump him and bruise him up a little bit.
He said he wanted some bodies. Russ, why is it that if anything, you sometimes do too much, right? Because if your teammates can't do it, you just got to take it upon yourself because that's how competitive you are. You want to win. You need to win. Now, it's one thing if you were on a team where we look at the roster and go, all right, come on. And then it's an imperfect roster. No roster's perfect. But you have, I really believe, maybe for the second time in Russell Westbrook's career, he has a legitimate championship squad around him. 2016, I thought that was a championship caliber roster. They didn't get it done. The Cavs did. The Warriors didn't. Neither did the Thunder. Okay. Now, for the second time in your career, Russ, you got a legit championship caliber squad around you. And so we want to know, how great are you? Can you be one of the central pieces that is so good that you guys win a championship? We're looking at you, not as a role player or whatever, but as a central figure in the nucleus of a potential championship team. Of course there's something to prove, because you don't have a championship yet.
Here's the deal. I don't disagree with you, Max. I just want to go a little bit deeper in all seriousness, because obviously Russell Westbrook and I have had some differences, and, you know, I've addressed that, and he's addressed it as well, and everything's cool. Here's the deal. He does have something to prove, first of all, that he can win a championship. Period. There's nothing else left to prove, just to win a championship. And I don't think he meant what he said when he said in the nation's capital a few months ago that championships don't mean nothing to him. He sees plenty of champions who are less happier than himself. I think what we have seen from Russell Westbrook is a guy whose level of sensitivity has been heightened in terms of people creating narratives about him and him sitting back and him no longer sitting back and just taking it. He's going to defend himself, and he's going to fend off those naysayers and some of the things that they may say, myself included, because he believes that anything that comes close to addressing or attacking his character is something that he needs to debunk. I respect that. So I want to sit up there and say on national television, there's no reason nor is there any excuse for us to question the character of Russell Westbrook. The brother gives us 100% every night. He goes out and goes all out every night, plays at 100 miles an hour. He never cheats the game in that regard at all, okay? And off the court, never gets in any kind of trouble whatsoever. He's a high character guy. All right? So I want to make sure that I'm clear with all of those things that I just said, because it's incredibly important that people understand. My point is...
Do we need a lower third for this, or is it too serious?
Say what?
Do we need the lower third about Russell Westbrook for this,
nope.
Or is this too serious?
Nope, we don't need it. We don't need it. We don't need it at all, not when it comes to him. Here's what I want him and all the people who love him and know him personally to understand. We are talking about the game of basketball, not his character, certainly not his character as a man, and the great things that he's accomplishing off the court. Max, I was driving down, I think it was somewhere in Burbank, whatever. I mean, Max, it was like a damn near a mile of stores, and all of them were dealerships in his name. The brother's doing big things. I mean, Russell Westbrook's doing big things, man. And there's a certain audience that he's trying to reach and uplift, and he's doing that too. And he does a lot of things in the community that people don't realize about, and he deserves credit for that. At the end of the day, we come back to basketball. And I'm going to stick to my point about this. When you are that great, as great as he is, I don't want to see you in Washington for a team that's squeezing into the playoffs, so that was 13 games under 500. Now, he can't help that. You want to get the hell out of Houston, you got to go where they sent you, and then ultimately you end up landing where you really, really wanted to land, which is back home here in L.A. wearing a Lakers uniform. Fair enough. But now that you're here, and you're an L.A. native, and you started at UCLA, you know what time it is. you know what Laker Nation expects. You know it's about the chip. And you got to go for it. You don't get it, you don't get it. But you really, really, really got to go for it. That chip has to be the priority, more so than anything else. And in the end, when you look at Russell Westbrook, this is what the bottom line is going to be. He's going to the Hall of Fame. We're going to celebrate him one day as one of the greatest players we've ever seen, you know, when you look at what his resume entails. But Kevin Durant, Serge Ibaka, Reggie Jackson, James Harden, then Victor Oladipo, Paul George, then James Harden again, Bradley Beal, and now LeBron James and Anthony Davis were all teammates of yours at one point in time in your career. It's not a good thing if all of those teammates are people that you had and you don't have one single championship to show for it.
No.
Period. That has to be the priority. And again, like when he says he has nothing to prove, no, he doesn't as an individual performer. No, he doesn't as a Hall of Famer, Hall of Fame credentials. No, he doesn't with any of those things. It's just with one thing and one thing only. At some point in time, when you got those kind of teammates, you got to have at least one chip to show for it.
Let me just say, we're going to miss Russell Westbrook when he's gone.
Yes,
he's one of those guys we're going to, and for all the haters, you're only hurting yourself because you're missing the ride.
Exactly.
We're going to tell our grandkids that we saw Russell Westbrook. He's that kind of player. Mm-hmm. We want him to win a championship because, almost out of gratitude, most Westbrook fans, because I think fans want it for him more than anyone else. So that on top of all that other stuff, we'll tell our grandkids about him, we can say he was a champion, an NBA champion.
Max, when you say, last point, when you say we're going to miss him when he's gone, you're absolutely right. We're going to miss him when he's gone. But we're also missing him when he's going home in the first round. Because we see inferior players that are playing deeper into their seasons. Now, obviously, it might not be because of them. It might be because of the teammates they have. But I'm saying nobody expected much from you last year because you was in D.C., and we know they didn't have that kind of